So far we have covered many of the ways you can manipulate your sounds, and how to use resynthesis to create your samples. In the next video, we'll go on to show you how to use modulation within Morphine. Modulation is when you use some form of control, like a modulation wheel or a pitch bend wheel, to control one of the parameters available. However, it is not just controls that you can use to modulate your sounds. You can also modulate your sounds over time by using envelopes in very much the same way you would use them in the spectrum editor. To access the modulation panel, all you need to do is click this button here. This will alter the display to show the modulation matrix and the envelope generator. The envelopes are shown here, and they work in a very similar way to the spectrum editor that was described in an earlier chapter. It includes a velocity and keyboard tracking control. They also share the same loop point controls as well. There is one major difference, however. These envelopes have a bipolar switch, and this allows you to use negative values. So for instance, if it was mapped to pitch, you can have the pitch vary up or down over a period of time. The interface for these envelopes allows you to create and move nodes on an XY axis, with one axis indicating the strength and the other time. You can switch between the 4 different envelopes by clicking the relative button on the right-hand side of the modulation panel. That explains the envelope generator section of the interface. But we still have to decide what these envelopes will actually control. And the first step to doing this is to click one of the 12 source wheel sections. This brings down a drop-down menu with a list of all the modulation sources that you can choose from. Once this is done, you can then move on to the relative modulation target field. As you can see, there are a lot of different targets you can choose from. Once you have selected your source and target, you need to set the strength of the envelope. At the center, the modulation will have no effect on the sound, and as you move this further away from the center, it will affect the sound more strongly. Moving it to the right will have the modulation follow its source normally, and moving it to the left will affect the modulation by working inversely. Basically, it will mirror the sound's modulation in the opposite direction. Working with and learning how to use modulation can lead to some interesting effects. For example, you can choose to have a modulation wheel can affect the panning of one generator in one direction, while affecting another generator in another direction, while simultaneously changing the volume of each of them. By modulation, you are only held back by your imagination. The possibilities are endless. Lastly, you can change the pitch bend amount up here in this section. It is useful to be able to change this, as you may want your pitch bend wheel to modulate a parameter without affecting your pitch. Or alternatively, you may want to have the pitch bend play up an octave instead of just the standard 2 notes. Now that you understand modulation, in the next video we'll move on to the effects section.